that's described in the book. Walking whales. In Darwin's time, two species of fossil whales had been discovered, Basilosaurus and Dorodon. But there were no fossils of intermediate forms to provide evidence that whales had evolved from land animals, as Darwin believed. Land animals come before whales in the fossil record, so it appears that whales had to have evolved from land animals. In the 1980s, a wolf-sized land animal was announced to be the ancestor of modern whales because it had a bone in its ear that resembled a bone up to that point found only in the ears of whales. It was named Pakicetus, or Pakistani whale. Cetus is the Latin word for whale. But critics pointed out that there was still a huge gap between Pakicetus and true whales, so the criticisms continued. Then, in 1994, scientists found a fossil they called Evolutionists natans, or walking swimming whale. And another group of scientists discovered Rhodocetus, and they announced that Evolutionists and Rhodocetus now provided the intermediate forms between Pakicetus and true whales. So in 1994, Stephen Jay Gould wrote, "The embarrassment of past absence has been replaced by a bounty of new evidence and by the sweetest series of transitional fossils an evolutionist could ever hope to find. I cannot imagine a better tale for popular presentation of science, as though evolution and science were the same thing, or a more satisfying and intellectually based political victory over lingering creationist opposition." Well, eventually some other forms were found, and now textbooks routinely show a series of these fossils as evidence that whales gradually evolved from land mammals, though the arrows in this drawing are completely imaginary. Actually, even evolutionary biologists acknowledge that no one of these forms could have evolved into the next one, because they all have features they would have to lose in order to become the next form. So they're not actually ancestors and descendants. But the textbooks don't need to worry about that. But here's the rub. All of the so-called walking whales, remember this is a whale just because it has a certain ear bone, was fully terrestrial. We have fully terrestrial, primarily terrestrial. These animals, it turns out, were land animals that had spent a lot of their time in the water, like sea lions and otters. That was the structure of their anatomy. The fully aquatic whales up here are actually quite different. And the transition between the primarily terrestrial amphibious mammals and the fully aquatic whales is still missing. Fully aquatic whales actually differ from these amphibious mammals, in many respects. Some of them, a few of them, there's actually quite a few, are blowholes. So these animals all breathe through their nostrils at the front of their snout. These animals breathe through holes in the tops of their heads. Quite different, anatomically and physiologically. Whales have flukes that are not at all like the tails of these amphibious mammals down here, or these terrestrial ones down here. Flukes are very complex structures, aerodynamically almost perfect, although, I mean, they're in the water, but the flow over them has been determined to be almost ideal. They have their own tendons connecting them to muscles in the tail. Here's the tail, here's the fluke. And so the fluke is actually moved independently of the tail to propel the animal through the water. And these whales, some of them can reach speeds of 30 miles an hour in the water, quite fast. These are not like the passive flippers of a scuba diver. They're active muscles. Internal testicles. Sea lions have external testicles, but the streamlined bodies of fully aquatic whales have internal testicles. Well, unless these testicles are cooled, they're sterile. And a sterile whale is not a link in any evolutionary chain. The system that cools these testicles is quite complex. It wouldn't have evolved before the testicles were internalized, and yet if the testicles were internalized before the system evolved, the animals would be sterile. So again, we have a big gap here between the amphibious mammals and the fully aquatic whales.